It's my great pleasure to be talking to Jonathan Glancey, co-author with Ian Logan of Locomotive, Railroad Graphics and the American Dream. Jonathan is a former architecture and design editor of The Guardian and author of numerous books, including The Genius of Design, Design Icons, and Concorde, a supersonic story. Jonathan, maybe you'd like to tell us how you came to be involved in Locomotive and what inspired you to write about American railroad iconography.
I had an email from Ian Logan who said, "Dear Jonathan, I hope you remember me. You certainly used to come to my shop a lot in Charterhouse Square in London," which I did. Ian had a lovely shop selling all sorts of glorious design objects, but they could vary from model aeroplanes, but beautiful ones, to tin signs and boxes and model trains. It was a cornucopia of wonderful things, like a kind of Tutankhamun's tomb for a collector of jolly things. And Ian, of course, I thought he's a wonderful person, such a delightful, entertaining person, and a brilliant designer. So I said, "Yes, of course, what do you want?" Without thinking, we're about to plunge into the depths of a book that has been a lot more detailed and exciting than I had first thought. Ian had started with a little publication some years ago on this subject of US railway logos, a passion of his for decades. But now it's going back to be transformed into what's become an extremely comprehensive and extremely beautiful book.
Thank you. Could you maybe elaborate on what is it that makes the design iconography of US railroad graphics so special and so unique?
The great and the small and the medium-sized railroads of the United States for virtually the whole of the 20th century acted like one giant billboard. Everything they did was to advertise themselves in one sense. So when you arrived in America, there was this excitement from the word go. I think this really got going, by the way, in the Great World's Fair in Chicago in 1893, when the States was on its way to becoming the world's biggest economy, and they had a lot to show. And the railroads were, of course, the way people got to Chicago, the great railway hub. And the railroads at that time, the way they presented themselves was quite old-fashioned, quite archaic in terms of graphics, lettering, advertising. But they moved very quickly from there, really did. This was the moment to show not just America, but to show the world what they could do. And they did this, as it were, this great advertisement for themselves, plastered across the rolling stock of their trains, their wagons, their railway carriages, their locomotives, and then across the stations, across virtually everything you touched and saw. And when you got on the trains, and as they progressed through the 20th century, everything you touched would have logos all over them, whether it was a box of matches, an ashtray, a saucer for your teacup. There was nothing that didn't say what that railroad was, pushing the idea of we are wonderful and special all the time. And they were really, really good at it, as the Americans are with advertising.
You've written extensively on architecture, and there is a whole chapter in the book devoted to the architecture of US stations and the way that it actually reflected the corporate identity of various railroads.
It's utterly thrilling the way the architects and their clients, the railroad chiefs, wanted to express different parts of the American story. So, for instance, if you travel to one part of America, you would see architecture that would be Norman, neo-Norman, Romanesque. How strange it is. These great cathedrals, as it were, railway cathedrals designed in Romanesque style. And other parts of the States, particularly down the southwest, the Santa Fe railroads, which passed through the old Spanish territories into California, they had the look of Spanish mission stations, churches, extraordinary things, utterly charming. And that happened right through the States. There was no, because the States are so huge, I mean, colossal, a country that's also a continent, really, the breadth and depth of railway architecture was enormous. And the scale and the bravura the braggadocio of it all made it doubly exciting. And when you saw the scale of the trains that would come into those stations, it made it doubly exciting.
Obviously, alongside architecture, railways have been a long-standing fascination of yours. You've written, I think, 4 books on the subject, including Giants of Steam and a book on John Betjeman on trains. How did your enthusiasm for the railways come about?
From birth. I mean, architecture and trains from birth, I should think, because just the sound and sight. I'm just old enough to remember steam trains in some of the London railway stations, and to be at Waterloo and to see these great, beautiful Merchant Navy Pacific locomotives, which are taking boat trains to Southampton, which would then, of course, take people across to the United States. The idea was thrilling and romantic. And by the way, that always was a connection there to the States. I used to love any chance to go to Southampton and watch the liners go in and out. And there they were, still when I was a little boy, of course, there was the Queen Elizabeth, there was the QE2, and you wanted to be aboard them. Of course, I couldn't, but what a dream that was to go to America. And I think that dream excited generations of people who love both design and adventure and railways.
Thinking of the great transatlantic liners makes me think of the heyday of Art Deco. And again, in the book, we have an entire chapter devoted to the streamlined style. Could you possibly expand on that a little bit, on its evolution and its significance and its relation to some, hugely iconic buildings like the Chrysler Building in Manhattan? Yeah.
The Art Deco style emerged in Paris in 1925 at a great exhibition there, and it was seized on. The iconography of the design was seized on immediately by advertisers, designers, by corporations, whether they were sailing ships or building furniture or running railroads. It was just this combination of exquisite design was utterly, totally glamorous, and it just happened to suit the States very, very well indeed. It was Hollywood style, really, once it got to America from Paris, and it was adopted across the country to the point where everything you could pick up within a few years, certainly by 1939, almost anything you could pick up in any shop or any cafe you sat at and looked at the table, there were Art Deco objects, and they could be anything. It could be an Art Deco pencil sharpener, an Art Deco chair, cushion, pillow, everything, Art Deco. And the railroads made great use of it, but they combined it in this age of streamlining. And streamlining was important both for speed, obviously, a new generation of trains, both steam, electric and diesel that raced across the States. But the combination of is the style mixed with the speed. So the engineering had this wonderful marriage with pure decorative style, but they went together. So they're very rarely, design wasn't superfluous, it went well. And yet Art Deco is often considered a bit too playful, sometimes a bit kitsch even. But on the other hand, it did combine with engineering and architecture, from the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, and to great, great railway trains, which were some of the best in the world by 1940.
I mean, we tend to associate modernism in railway design with diesel, but these were actually steam engines, weren't they, to begin with?
Well, I think there was a great golden age of American railroad design. I think that is the 1930s, and it does go hand in hand with streamlining and Art Deco, and rather than European modernism, which is a more serious and rational and geometric and technical affair and puritanical affair. The American streamlining was joy, razzmatazz. That is the pleasure we get with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the book takes us fairly chronologically through the history of US railway graphics, sort of more or less up to the present day. I mean, how would you assess the state of things nowadays?
Well, American railroad graphics in a way can be divided up into 3 distinct eras. One, it really is of 19th century, where everything's florid typescripts, florid advertisements, florid lettering. It moved on to become very elegant, marriage of the modern world, modern European typefaces, with a bit of Art Deco streamlining razzmatazz. And so you get this very different style of lettering in America than you do get in Europe at the time in the 1930s. The American style is just that bit more bold and slightly more brazen, brilliance, but really slightly in your face. And the European versions of those types, discreet, quiet, really elegant, and actually intellectually sound. And so quite a difference. And that's, but then I think the sad thing, and I do say sad, because other people disagree, but when the American railroads lost out to the automobile and to intercity American jets, aeroplanes, they were taken over or declined, or they became parts of big corporations, whether Amtrak and they lost their special character, and the lettering went with it. And at that time, the 1970s, there was this tendency in design generally for this rather corporate business style of graphic design, advertising, lettering, and design. And it just made the trains look that bit lackluster, dull, and boring. And I think that is something that the States hasn't recovered from. Having said that, there are some railroads that still go with it, big style, American, and that's, for example, the Union Pacific Railroad plasters its very smart looking trains with giant stars and stripes flags. It's done that since 9/11, really, but it looks exciting. This is America, and these giant freight trains rolling through the Midwest, and they can be a mile or even 2 miles long, with perhaps 5 or 6 or great big thundering diesel locomotives pulling them. They are epic machines, and still as exciting as they were in steam days.
Fantastic. Yes. I mean, one of the things that comes over in the book is that what gave a lot of these logos their character was the fact they weren't actually designed by advertising people or professional designers, but they were often done in-house by the staff of the railroad. They may well be the engineers or even ticket agents.
Anybody could have a go on an American railroad at designing their logos. And that started very early on. I mean, the traffic manager of the Santa Fe, J.J. Byrne, in 1880, designed basically what was the Santa Fe logo, which I think, and Ian Logan agrees with me, is probably the best United States railroads produced. It's a wonderful blue cross in a circle, and it conjures up the images in a way, again, of Spanish missions. But it does say, this is the Southwest, just so brilliantly. And the traffic manager who designed it, Byrne, he did it sitting on a train and just drawing around a coin with a pen and then just filling it in. And that's it. And that lasted,
I'm told.
Well, yeah, and that went from 1880 right through into the end of the 1960s. That's slightly refined over the years, slightly smoothed out, slightly streamlined, but basically the same thing. And that is a big difference. So the American railroads are in a way more instinctive than their European counterparts, which were always would have used from very early on very serious lettering designers and then design studios to do the work. The Americans eventually did give a lot of work to great design studios, but that took a long, long time. And a lot of the best logos are from people we don't know who they are at all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, that's fantastic. We've pretty much covered the ground there. Thank you very much indeed. Logomotive is published by Sheldrake Press.